Welcome back. So, I'm now down here in Miami and here in Fort Lauderdale as I'm going to be here for the next couple of days. And there is some good news. Unlike last time when I was in New York just a couple of days and I wasn't able to go to the New York Derby because we just didn't really kind of had time to do so. This time, I do have a chance to go to an MLS game, and I'll talk about a little bit later. Well, actually, I'll just tell you right away which one I will be going tomorrow. And then, of course, is this one between Inter Miami versus Toronto FC. And unfortunately, I'm also not going to film that game because there's also one game that I am also going to be keeping an eye on very closely, which this game is not on this board, but it's actually going to be on the next board that I'll talk about a little bit later in the preview that I am definitely going to be keeping a very close eye on. But as we are now pretty much down to the last couple of weeks of the season, not only the fact that we have teams that are trying to get into the playoff position, if these are the teams that kind of like in the bubble or teams that is in the playoff hunt, but we also have teams that are just fighting for some seeds and fighting for home field advantage. And even in the Western Conference, we have that battle for the top spot in the Western Conference to get the first round bye. And then, of course, we also have teams that are pretty much eliminated. Last weekend's action, we actually had a lot of team that was actually eliminated from playoff contention. And again, I haven't really been able to keep track of who is going to be eliminated for this upcoming match because, again, they did not release an article talking about which team is going to be eliminated and which team can clinch this week. But I know for sure that there are going to be teams that can clinch playoffs in this midweek action, and there are going to be team that is eliminated. And for those teams that have been eliminated, I was thinking about doing the moving forward series when I'm down here in Fort Lauderdale, but because of how small my board is, I just think I don't have enough space to do so. Plus the fact that I think I'm gonna be even more busy here in Fort Lauderdale than I was in New York. I probably will not have times to, of course, do these moving forward series and do these news of the week videos. So basically, I'm just doing the bare minimum, and that, of course, is do previews and reviews of this game. But that being said, let us actually get into the first game, and that, of course, is Atlanta versus NYCFC. And also, there are going to be 12 games that's going to be happening tomorrow. I have no idea how in the world am I going to keep track of every single game, and I probably won't because since I'm attending this one, and I think there's like 8 games that is kicking off around the 7:30 time and the 8 o'clock time, it is pretty much impossible for me to do so, and that I'm going to pretty much have to just kind of watch the highlights in terms of most of these games. But the first one, of course, as I mentioned, is between Atlanta versus NYCFC. We're coming into this game. Atlanta has a record of 11-9-9. While for NYCFC, yeah, the free fall has been noticed as their record is 11-7-11 because they have lost four. Well, they haven't lost 4 in a row, but they are on I believe, a 5-game winless run, and they have not scored in the last 4 games. I mean, it was kind of remarkable that I mentioned in the review where it was remarkable to hear that NYCFC has gone over 400 minutes without scoring a goal, because when you look at this attack, you did not think that this would be an attack that struggled to score goals. And they're now facing against an Atlanta team that, this is a team that is known to play good defense and also have a decent enough of attack. And they were also able to get a shutout in the last game by winning 2-0 against TFC and find themselves above the red line right now. Now, in terms of the last couple of games and the remaining games for both of these teams, for Atlanta, they got Inter Miami next at home, and then they got TFC at home, and then they go on the road and play against the Red Bulls, which that could be a playoff 6-pointer, and then they finish off the season relatively easy, playing on the road against FC Cincinnati. While for NYCFC, they got DC United at home, and then they have Chicago Fire at home before they play against Inter Miami on the road, and then their final game is going to be a bit of a tough one against the Philadelphia Union at home. And the schedule is okay. I mean, there's are some tough games, but there are some games that you would think that they should be getting wins. But that being said, I think one thing that NYCFC needs to do is that they got to score a goal. Like, anytime when a team is on a long goalless drought, they want to make sure they can finally score a goal, because when you can score a goal, you can start it to kind of open up the attack a little bit. And yeah, this team just, they need to find a way to score a goal to finally end this drought, but it's not going to be easy against an Atlanta team that is looking to try to get another win to get themselves higher in the playoff standings. Now, moving on in terms of the next match, and that, of course, as this pen for some reason is not working, but the next match is going to be FC Cincinnati taking on the Chicago Fire, which will also start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Like I said, this is the first of 5 games that's going to be kicking off at that time span. Cincinnati, of course, coming into this game with a 4-8-17 record. We know that they have already been eliminated and that they are bound to potentially make history of winning 3 wooden spoon in a row, as they have now lost 7 in a row coming into this game, whereas they're going to be playing against a Fire team that have 1 win in the last 8 games, and their record is 7-7-16. And usually when you get to kind of these kind of matchup when both teams have been eliminated. Oh, did I mention the Fire have also been eliminated last week? Yeah. When you get these kind of matchup, I know it's very easy for people to, of course, just not tune into this game. And I expect, the viewership for this game is probably going to be very low. I don't even think Cincinnati or Chicago fans are going to be watching this one because, when your team is eliminated, there's really no point of watching your team play for the rest of the season because there's really nothing else to play for. But that being said, anytime when you have these kind of matchups, sometimes these could also be very interesting. And for a lot of these players, even though they are on a team that is already eliminated, they're not just going to think about the golf courses already. They're fighting for their jobs and they're looking to trying to maintain their position because both of these teams, they're going to be having a bit of a rebuild heading into the off season. And you know that these players want to make sure that they, of course, play well in the latter part because whenever a team goes for a rebuild, there could be a change, and these players could potentially be part of the change, but not in a good way. But now, moving on, in terms of the next match, is going to be DC versus New England. So this game will also start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. DC coming into this game with a 12-5-12 record, and they're currently, I believe, in 6th place in the Eastern Conference. There, right now, I think there's actually a 3-point gap between 5th place all the way down to 10th place. Yeah, it is very tight right now, and DC is only a point above the red line. And if they want to, of course, stay above the red line at least for this match week, they need to somehow find a way to beat against New England, who has a 26-4 record. And even though the Revs, of course, have already clinched the playoffs, and also I think they are going to clinch the number 1 seed in the East if they can get a win, or depending on if Nashville drop their points or lose their games. Bruce Arena is not just going to just think that getting the number 1 seed is enough of an accomplishment. He's going for the record. He wants to take that record away from LAFC, and especially from his former assistant Bob Bradley. And knowing the fact that they drew in their last game, the task of potentially getting that record gets a little bit more difficult, as they're now still just 7 points away from tie. Well, actually not tying for the record, but breaking the record. They're 6 points away from tying the record, but they're actually 7 points away from breaking the record that LAFC set back in 2019. Whereas for DC, they drew 0-0 at home to Nashville, a rare time where DC actually got whole scoreless in a game, and they're definitely looking to try not to do that because this is a team is known for their attack, one of the highest goal scoring team in the league, and I expect there's going to be goals in this game. I mean, I expect that with how both of these attack are very lethal, I expect there should be a lot of goals in this game. But at the end of the day, let's see if it's going to be DC that's going to come out on top and get themselves 3 points to stay above the red line, or will the Revs potentially get 3 points? Because when you look at their next 5 games or the remaining games for both of these teams, for New England, their remaining schedule is not that easy. I mean, they got to go on the road against Orlando City before playing at home against Colorado, and then they finish at home against Inter Miami. While for DC, their schedule is also kind of, I wouldn't say tough, but their next couple of games is going to be huge too, because they're going to be playing against teams that is around them, that is on the road against NYCFC, playing against the Red Bulls in an ultimate 6-pointer playoff decider in the Atlantic Cup. Then they got Columbus at home, and then they finished the season with Toronto FC. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who potentially is going to get a win to either get them closer to potentially breaking the record that is New England, or will DC potentially get 3 points to stay above the red line. But that being said, moving on into the game that I'm going to be attending tomorrow, and that, of course, is Inter Miami versus Toronto FC. And again, unfortunately, the game that I'm attending is kind of a game where both team is kind of playing a relatively meaningless game. I mean, even though Inter Miami hasn't been eliminated, they're getting very close to do so after suffering that loss against Columbus, and I believe they're now 9 points back of the red line with like only four games or 5 games to play for the remainder of the season, whereas they play against a TFC team that have already been eliminated and have a record of 6-7-16. This game, of course, as always, starts at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Miami, of course, they've lost 6 in a row for the second time this season, and when you lose 6 in a row twice in the season, yeah, there's no way back in terms of you getting into the playoff hunt. I mean, I don't remember the last time a team that have lost 6 in a row twice in the season and still were able to make the playoffs in the same season. It's just not. It's just really hard to do so, and right now, because of the bad run that this team has been, it seems like playoff is now pretty much out of reach. And that goes the same with TFC, who pretty much would confirm that they were eliminated, I believe, last week, when even though they of course won that game. Who did they of course won against? I'm kind of forgetting who they won before they lost 2-0 to Atlanta. But either way, they're pretty much counting the days before the off season, where again there's going to be changes I expect for TFC heading into this off season. But even though this is kind of a meaningless game, I'm definitely excited to visit the stadium. I mean, I know the stadium there in Fort Lauderdale, it's not really a permanent stadium for Inter Miami, but anytime when you get to visit an MLS stadium, and especially a stadium that is just a temporary stadium, that's kind of something that I want to do, because in a couple of years that stadium is probably not going to be there, and Miami will actually play in proper Miami area and play in Freedom Park just a couple of years from now. So yeah, it's good to kind of check that off the bucket list, even though this is a game between two teams that, yeah, both of these teams are just kind of playing out the string for the rest of the season. And also taking a look at the last 5 games the last 4 games for both of these teams. For Miami, they got FC Cincinnati at home in the next game. Then they go on the road against Atlanta. Then they play at home against NYCFC before finishing off the season, and potentially could be the game where they might hand New England the record for the most point in the regular season, as they're going to be playing them on the road. For TFC, they got Montreal in the Canadian Classic in the next game. Then they got the Philadelphia Union at home, and then they go on the road against Atlanta before they actually have one more game before the regular season ends. I mean, it's kind of weird the fact that they still have one more game to play before decision day, because usually most team that has already been eliminated, they're pretty much done for the season. But they actually have to play against Pacific FC in the Canadian Championship, and if they can win that, then they will also have to play another game in the Canadian Championship final, which I think that's probably the thing that they're going to be fighting for the rest of the season. So that's kind of the bonus of Toronto, especially being a Canadian team, where even if you are probably eliminated from playoff contention, with the Canadian Championship kind of play in a very irregular time this season because of the pandemic, their season technically is not done, even though the decision after decision day and the regular season is already over. But now moving on in terms of the next match, and it is going to be Orlando City versus Montreal. So this game will also start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, but this game will definitely have more of a playoff kind of playoff kind of feeling, with the way that both of these teams, well, at least for Orlando City, I believe they're now either in 5th or 4th place right now, but they're also looking to try to climb up the table as they have a record of 12-9-8. While for Montreal, they have a record of 11-8-10 as this game will start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. Orlando, of course, they won in the last game against FC Cincinnati 1-0. But notice how I wrote controversially because they really got away with a penalty kick that should have been given to FC Cincinnati late in the game. Whereas for Montreal, they drew 2-2 against the Union. Oh, actually not on the road, but they were playing at home in that game. They actually almost lost that one if it wasn't for a late equalizer from Ibrahim in the 95th minute, and their record is now at 11-8-10. And just like what I said about DC being a point above the red line, they're also a point above the red line, but they actually have a worse goal differential than DC has, so they're actually the last team that is going to be in the playoffs if the Eastern Conference, or if the season actually ended this week. But yeah, in terms of the remaining game for both of these teams, for Orlando, they got New England at home in the next game. Then they go on the road against Columbus, and then at home against Nashville. And then on the final game of the season, they get to play against Montreal, but this time on the road. For Montreal, they got Toronto, as I mentioned, in the Canadian Classic. Then they have a Canadian Championship game against Forge on the road. Then they go on the road against the New York Red Bulls, which that would definitely be a playoff six-pointer, before they play at home against Houston and play at home against Orlando City. So, certainly for Orlando City, as I mentioned, of the fact that, remember how I said after the gauntlet that they run through how their schedule is going to be a little bit easier? Yeah, no, it's not. It's actually still relatively hard with some of the games that they have to play. And, for Montreal, it's also going to be interesting to see, with the way that when they do play against the Red Bulls in that playoff six-pointer, and that comes right before when they have to play a Canadian Championship game in the middle of the week, and they have to go on the road to do so. You wonder whether or not if Wilfred Nancy decided to rest some of his guys and maybe not even play the starting 11 in that Canadian Championship game. I mean, I know, for Montreal, the difference between them and TFC is TFC, they don't really need to focus on the rest of the regular season because they're already eliminated. But for Montreal, this is going to be a tough decision that Wilfred Nancy has to choose. Do they want to, of course, potentially win the Canadian Championship so they can go to CCL again, or do they want to make it to the playoffs? And if you, of course, want to make it to the playoffs, then you most likely might have to just play your second team or even your third team in that game against Fortune. You might potentially lose that game if you do so, because Montreal doesn't really have a lot of depth in their team. So yeah, this is going to be a big decision that I think Wilfred Nancy is going to do, and really there's no good answer in terms of what he needs to do. I mean, yes, you want to make it to the playoffs, but, if you miss out on the Canadian Championship, you miss out on a trophy and miss out being in CCL. But if you do focus on the Canadian Championship and you miss the playoffs, their fans are not going to be happy. Although I would say that I think even if they do miss out on the playoffs, I think their fans will still be kind of happy with the way how this season has gone, especially with the way that nobody expected Montreal be a team that is in a playoff hunt. Like, a lot of people thought that they were going to finish dead last, including myself. But again, they have really exceeded their expectation. But you do know that fans, even though they know that their team exceeds expectation, they'll be a little bit disappointed if this team does not make it to the playoffs. Especially, they've been on this kind of tightrope of being above and below the red line, and they want to see their team at the end of the day be above the red line. So yeah, but moving on in terms of the next match, and finally talk about a Western Conference matchup, because so far most of the game that we talked about is Eastern Conference matchup, and that of course is FC Dallas taking on LAFC. So while for Dallas their playoff hope is pretty much all over and they're also counting on the days of being eliminated, that's not the same case for LAFC, because after that big 3-1 win against the Quakes, not on the road, it's actually at home. I don't know why I keep putting team playing at home on the road. Again, this has been a relatively long vacation, and I actually have not got a lot of sleep throughout this vacation, which is why you can probably hear in my voice I'm kind of a little bit tired, even though it's like 2:25 in the afternoon right now. But yeah, for LAFC, after that big win against the Quakes in a game where it was really a must win for both of these teams if they want to keep in the playoff hunt, they're still in this race, and I believe they're, I think, 4 points back of Minnesota for that last spot in the Western Conference. And in this game, they got another must-win against a Dallas team that, as I said, they're kind of pretty much counting down the days that is going to be eliminated. But what's interesting about Dallas, besides the 6-10-13 record, and that this game will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, unlike the previous 5 game that start at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, is that Dallas have not played in a very long time. Like, they were actually the only team to not play last week, and they got the bye week sweepstake. But because of the fact that they didn't play last week or during the international, well, actually, I think they did play during the international break. But since they did not play last week, it's been a while since FC Dallas has played a game. In fact, I think the last time that FC Dallas has played a game was all the way back in October 3rd. So, when you have such a long break like that, usually when you have a long break against a team that is LAFC that's going to be having a short rest with them playing on Saturday, and they have to go on the road, you would think it's an advantage toward the home team that has the long rest. But then you also realize, because of how long of a rest that FC Dallas has, how much of that sharpness that you're going to lose, and how much of that rust could come in this game. Because it's one thing to have long rest, but to have too long of a rest, that's when it could be a bit of an issue with some of these teams. So, yeah, we'll see how FC Dallas and their match sharpness is going to be considered. They haven't played in a very long time, and for LAFC, we'll see whether or not if they can continue the momentum that they had against the Quakes. I mean, they need to go on a bit of a consistent run, because they've been kind of a little bit inconsistent in the last couple of games. In fact, to tell you how big this game is for LAFC, when you look at their remaining schedule, they go on the road against Minnesota in the next game. Then they play against the top team in the West, that is the Seattle Sounders. Then they got the Vancouver Whitecaps, and then they go on the road against the Colorado Rapids. That is a really tough schedule to finish off the season. Whereas for Dallas, they go on the road against the Galaxy, play against RSL, then play at home in the final Copa Tejas match that they're going to play this season against Austin FC, and then they finish the season on the road against the San Jose Earthquakes. So, for Dallas, they do have some teams that is kind of like in the bubble, and that they can continue to play the spoiler role. We'll see whether or not if they can do so in this game against LAFC. But that being said, I am now going to actually erase this board and now look at the last 6 games that's going to be happening in terms of the midweek action of match week number 32. So now, we're going to talk about the Western Conference game, although, well, technically, if you look at these games, there's actually 4 of them that are Western Conference game, and one of them, which is the game that I'm about to talk to, is the only interconference match that is going to be happening, which is Minnesota taking on the Philadelphia Union. And this is why it was so important for the Loons to win against Austin FC, because they get to play against the Union, which, I know that whenever the Loons play against the Union, I always will remember they are the first team to be able to beat the Loons at Allianz Field, and it's not going to be easier than the last time that they went to Allianz Field and beat them on the road, because the Union is basically chasing for something that is completely different for Minnesota, where they're chasing for that second position and chasing Nashville in terms of getting that spot, whereas for Minnesota, they're just trying to get to the playoffs, being only a point above Vancouver. So this game will start at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Minnesota, of course, have an 11-8-10 record. As I mentioned, they won 1-0 against Austin away. It wasn't pretty, but they got the win to stay above the red line, while the Union, they've been unbeaten in the last 6 games. And in terms of the next couple of games, or the remaining games of the season, for Minnesota, they got LAFC at home in the next game. Then they go on the road in that crucial playoff 6-pointer against Vancouver. Then they play at home against SKC before going on the road on the final day against the LA Galaxy, which, depending on if this team is still just kind of above the red line and just in the bubble, that could also be a crucial playoff 6-pointer. Whereas for the Union, they got Nashville next at home before they play on the road against Toronto, and then they of course play at home against FC Cincinnati, and then they finish off the season against NYCFC. So yeah, like I said, for this game, I'm hoping that they can maybe get all 3 points. I mean, whenever they play at home. 3 points is definitely a minimum, but knowing the fact that they're playing such a good team like that, it's going to be very interesting to see whether they can do it, and especially against a team that have not lost in the last 6 games and have, quite frankly, not lost ever since they lost to Copa America in that CONCACAF Champions League second leg match. But now moving on, in terms of the next match, is the Houston Dynamo versus the LA Galaxy. And you know how I talked about last time that the Galaxy want to get on to a good run after they finally ended their 9-game winless run? Yeah, you got the Houston Dynamo, who, as I mentioned before, it seems like the Galaxy have always have a tough time against the Dynamo, and the Dynamo is definitely going to be confident coming into this game, because even though they are officially eliminated with a 6-12-12 record, they won against Seattle at home, and they took them down by a final score of 2-1. Whereas the Galaxy, they also won 2-1 at home, and they actually also won against a Cascadia team that is the Portland Timbers at home to snap their 9-game winless run, and their record is at 12-6-11. This game, of course, will start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. And in terms of the remaining game for both of these teams, for the Dynamo, they got Austin FC on the road in the, I believe that's the final Copa Tejas match that they're going to play. Then they play at home against Colorado, and they finish the season on the road against Montreal. And I don't think I mentioned this earlier when I talked about Montreal, their remaining season or remaining schedule, but I think that's the only matchup that is going to be an inter-conference matchup on decision day. Whereas for the Galaxy, they play at home against FC Dallas, and then they go on the road against Sporting KC. Then they go on the road against the Seattle Sounders, and then play at home against Minnesota United. So yeah, that is a really brutal run for the Galaxy to finish off the season, which is why these next 2 games, they got to get wins in these next two games. But you know, it's not going to be easy against a team that, again, the Galaxy, it's just something about the Dynamo that they always tend to struggle against, and you know, they're looking to try to buck that trend, because you know, these next 2 games against 2 Texas team that we know, with all these Texas team, they're the bottom of the table in the Western Conference. It is an absolute must-win before they face against the top 2 team in the West after facing these 2 Texans team. But now moving on, in terms of the next match on the board, it is going to be Nashville versus Columbus, which is the last Eastern Conference matchup of match week number 32 in terms of the midweek action. And this game, of course, will start at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, but that's the kickoff time. Oh, I actually didn't put the actual kickoff time because I couldn't fit it on the board here. But, you know, for Nashville, they're coming into this game with an 11-15-3 record. And, you know, as I said before, Nashville this season, they're the draw kings of MLS because they've now had 4 straight draws. And as I said before, you know, as much as it's great for Nashville to not lose games and also pick up all this draw, it doesn't really help them in terms of the standings wise, and in some way it's kind of hurting them in terms of the standings wise, because you know, with this last 4 draws, and technically they're winless in the last 4 games, they've allowed the Philadelphia Union to start to catch themselves up and try to take that second position away from them, where a couple of weeks ago it looks like for sure that they nail that second position in the Eastern Conference. But they're going to be playing against a Columbus team that is also hungry to get into this playoff race. They're 4 points back of the red line right now, as after they won 4-0 against Miami at home, and their record is 10-7-12. Remaining game for both of these teams, for Nashville, they got the Union on the road, which that could be a game that not only is the battle for the second position, but that could maybe be a game that determines who gets the second seed in the East. Then they got TFC on the road, FC Cincinnati at home, and they finish, or actually, no, I'm sorry, I'm actually looking at the wrong one there. They got FC Cincinnati on the road next after they go on the road against the Union. Then they go on the road against Orlando City, and they finish the season at home against the New York Red Bulls. I was actually looking at the Philly schedule in terms of the remaining games that they have. For Columbus, they have a home game against the New York Red Bulls. That is definitely a playoff 6-pointer. Then they have a home game against Orlando before going on the road against DC and finish the season at home against the Chicago Fire. So yeah, you know, this is a big game certainly for both teams, and in some way it's kind of similar to the Minnesota versus Philly game, where one team is trying to get a win so that they can potentially get that second position, and the other team is trying to get a win so that they can get closer to being above the red line. Although in this case, Minnesota is above the red line and Columbus is not, and they're still 4 points back. But now moving on into the last free match, and all these games are going to be Western Conference game, and that of course is the Colorado Rapids versus the Seattle Sounders. So if there is a matchup for this midweek action that is between the top teams in this 12-game action, this one will be the one, as it's the battle between the top 3 teams in the Western Conference, with the Rapids currently in third place with a 14-9-6 record, and the Sounders, who's currently the top team in the West with a 17-6-6 record. And I also did check the standings when I wrote the second board, and I believe they're 5 points ahead of Sporting KC in terms of first place. So they actually are definitely in the driving seat of potentially getting first place, and could potentially clinch first place if they can get a couple more wins, or if SKC, of course, drop a couple of results. But this game will start at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Colorado, of course, they lost 3-1 to RSL on the road, whereas for Seattle, they also lost on the road by a final score of 2-1 against the Houston Dynamo, and that also, I think, ended the 6-game winning streak that the Seattle Sounders has had. But yeah, this is a game that I'm pretty sure for the Rapids, they definitely want to have some revenge against the Sounders in the last game, because even though in the last game that they faced not long ago, which was the Sounders winning 4-1 in that game, I didn't think that it was kind of like a game that kind of reflect the scoreline in the game. I mean, I thought Colorado played well in that one against the Sounders, but they just could not put away those chances against the Sounders team. And the Sounders was being ruthless in that game, and they ultimately win by that kind of scoreline. So it's going to be interesting to see if the Rapids are going to play that similar game, and they also are going to get chances against the Sounders team, whether or not if they could take advantage and put away those chances. Because as the old saying goes, when you're the underdog and you're giving chances against a more superior team, you have to take advantage of it. But now moving on into the next match, and now we're getting to the very late games, because again, I'm in the East Coast right now, and because of the fact that when you're in the East Coast and you're watching these Western Conference games, you have to stay up very late for those. And I'm starting to get kind of now the taste of why maybe some of you, of course, are watching in the East Coast, and probably why you don't watch like the last couple of games, or maybe kind of get frustrated when your team playing against a Western Conference team and you have to stay up late, because it can be really tough to watch these games like at 10 at night and basically keep and track of it. But the next one, of course, is going to be the Portland Timbers taking on the Vancouver Whitecaps. So the Whitecaps, of course, I think this is the last game that they have in this gauntlet, although I'll talk about in the last 4 games. Oh, speaking of which, I forgot to talk about the last four games that the Rapids and Seattle has had. So for the Rapids, the last 4 games, they got Portland at home in the next game before playing on the road against New England, and then they're playing on the road against Houston before finish the season against LAFC. Whereas for the Sounders, they of course play at home against Sporting KC in the next match. That should be a match that could potentially determine who's going to finish at the top of the West. Then they go on the road against LAFC before playing against the Galaxy at home, and then they finish off the season against the Vancouver Whitecaps. But speaking of the Whitecaps, coming into this game, they're fresh off of a massive 2-1 win against Sporting KC at home to keep themselves only 1 point behind Minnesota in terms of the red line. Whereas for the Portland Timbers, they lost 2-1 on the road against the LA Galaxy, and their record is now at 14-4-11, and they've started to kind of open a little bit of a window to RSL in terms of getting that 4th position. I mean, the gap is still 4 points with about 4 games left to go, but for the Timbers, they need to keep winning games, because 4 points is still not that much of a gap where a team behind you cannot catch you, and we'll see whether or not if they can maybe wind the gap, or maybe keep pace with RSL, depending on if actually RSL doesn't play today, so they can have a chance to wind that gap to 7 points if they can get the win against the Whitecaps. But for the Whitecaps, they're also want to not only get a win in this game, but keep putting pressure against Minnesota, and especially what I mentioned, how Minnesota has a really tough game against the Union, and there could be a chance that they might not actually get all 3 points. This is a huge opportunity for the Whitecaps to potentially go above the red line, but if they're going to do so, they're going to be facing against a team that they tend to not have a good record whenever they play on the road. But in terms of the last 5 games for both of these teams, or the last 4 games for both of these teams, for the Timbers, they of course will be playing Colorado on the road before playing at home against the Quakes, and then they play on the road against RSL before playing at home against Austin FC. So it's kind of a mixed bag in terms of the schedule. There's some difficult game, but there are also some easy game with a mix of a game between RSL that could really determine who can get that 4th position. But for the Whitecaps, they of course go on the road against the Quakes before playing at home against Minnesota. But then they go on the road against LAFC, and they finish the season against the Seattle Sounders on the road. And I'm pretty sure Whitecaps fans know that they do not want to wait till the final day of the season to clinch for a playoffs, because they have to play against Seattle, which I know earlier this season they did well against the Sounders, but the last game was not so yeah, they're definitely looking to try to clinch the playoff position before that game. But when you look at the remaining schedule, it's actually pretty good, and the fact that they get to play against teams that is in that playoff hunt could be a good chance for them to basically get a win against them and also take their spot above the red line. But it's going to be interesting to see whether or not if the Whitecaps can survive this last gauntlet. I mean, even if they lose this game, it's not the worst case in the world, because like I said, Minnesota also have a tough game, and the Galaxy, even though you might think that it's not a tough game against Houston, it technically is, with the way that the Galaxy always tend to struggle against the Houston Dynamo. But now moving on into the last game on this board and the last game of the midweek action, and we finish off with the San Jose Earthquakes versus Austin FC. And there is an absolute must-win game that the Quakes have throughout this entire season. This is it. I mean, this is literally a must-win for the Quakes. If they do not win this game, then you might as well just count the days of elimination. I mean, in some way, you could maybe even count the days of elimination too. I mean, I feel like as a Quakes fan, I'm kind of started to count down to the days of elimination, because I think that with 8 points that they have to make up in a span of 5 games, they pretty much gonna have to win out for the remaining of the season. And when you look at the schedule, it is pretty hard to do so, with the way that they also have a couple of road games. But they're playing against an Austin team that again, they have been long eliminated, and they of course lost 1-0 on the road against, or not on the road, but at home against Minnesota, and their record is 7-4-18. Whereas for the Quakes, they lost 3-1 to LAFC away, and that was really, for some, might be the final nail in the coffin in terms of their hope of making the playoffs. But like I said, for those optimists that still think that the Quakes have a chance to make it to the playoffs, this is why I said this is an absolute must-win game. And I'm assuming they're probably going to win, because the whole rules of the fact that when I'm not at PayPal Park to watch the Quakes play, which that is the case. And by the way, I also need to sell my ticket, because I haven't sold my ticket from my season ticket account yet. But when I'm not at that game, there potentially is going to get a win. So I'm confident that they can of course get a win in this game. But that being said, Austin, they have been a team that can play spoilers, and we know last time when the Quakes play against Austin, they definitely had a tough time against Los Verde, and they had a dramatic comeback on the road to win that one. So yeah, we'll see whether or not if they can do so to keep their fringe playoff hope alive, because if they don't get a win in this game, you might as well just kiss their playoff hope goodbye. Like, there's just no chance that they're going to be making the playoffs, and now the conversation will just be started. Well, now whether or not if potentially Almeida could be fired this off season, because this project that he's been mentioning, that he's going to get this team to greatness, and throughout his regime, I mean, he did get this team to playoffs last season, but it feels like it's been kind of the same, where this has been a team that's either been a team that's not good enough to make it to the playoffs, or at very best a fringe playoff team. And it's kind of frustrating, because I want to see progress for the Quakes. I want to see them eventually go back to what it was in 2012 when they won the Supporters' Shield and become a legitimate playoff contender. But it's just with the way how messy this organization has been, now you know why I always be very pessimistic about this team for these last couple of years. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for the preview of all 12 of this game. As always, let me know in the comments below what do you think of these games. And as always, let me know in the comments your prediction for all 12 of these games. And like I said, it's going to be very tough for me to try to watch these games, especially I'm going to be going to one of them. But I'm going to try my best, and I'll also try my best to do the review on Thursday when I, of course, watch all the highlights of all these games and then, of course, do the review on Thursday. But until then, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I, of course, will see you guys next time.